Hello and welcome to a Final Four edition of the Eye on the U podcast. I'm David Wilson and I am joined on the other line. Now, kind of as always, it's been a whole bunch of weeks in a row by Michelle Kaufman, our Miami basketball beat writer here at the Herald live from Houston. Michelle, let's start with this. You've covered Miami basketball for a long time. Do you ever expect you to be covering a Final Four?
No, I can honestly say no. I've been covering the team for 26 years. I've been a beat writer for 26 years. And before that, I went to UM in 1985 when they resurrected the program.
That was the first year they came back, right?
Yeah, I wrote a story for the school paper that they were bringing basketball back to the University of Miami, and I was a student there at that time. So I have seen this program since 1985, and no, I never expected. I mean, even when they made the Elite Eight last year, I mean, the thought of University of Miami in the Final Four it's still a concept that's hard to imagine, but it's really happened. I was there today and they're here. So it's real.
Yeah. I don't know if we need to get, I want to talk obviously a little bit about just the combination of South Florida college basketball with Miami and FAU as we go along here. At some point, maybe next week, no matter what happens, or in the next couple weeks, we should probably kind of just dive into all the context. Like the fact that this school didn't have a basketball team for
14 years.
Yeah, for more than a decade is kind of crazy. And I think obviously that's become known here over like nationally. But I think a lot of people, my age who are not alive when Miami basketball didn't exist probably don't quite realize that it's pretty crazy. Like 1985, it's a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. Like
no, it's not, because I was
really,
there.
Yeah, exactly. Like
I think I'm still young and hip, and I was there in 1985.
Right. Like it's pretty incredible feat. This team obviously, in some ways, it is out of nowhere. They're a 5 seed, right? It's unlikely, and just again all the history behind it. But in other ways, well, one, obviously they were good all year long. They won the ACC. I think both of us thought they were the best team in the. I know they didn't win the tournament, but I think both of us thought all year long
this
team
would
was
have.
the
I think
best year in the ACC.
if Norchad had not gotten injured, I think they would have maybe won the tournament. So
and then the other thing that, I know they lost some really important guys from last year's team, but it is like they were really kind of an extension of last year's team in a lot of ways. Obviously, Jordan Miller taking a leap, Isaiah Wong obviously taking a leap as well. Couple key transfers, of course. Nigel Pack really replicating, I think, a lot of the Charlie Moore stuff. Very different player, but filling that void. This 2-year run is pretty incredible from this team. Obviously, Jim Larranaga has gotten a lot of the attention this year, but I wanted to start kind of with Wong and Miller, because those guys at this point, and like Cam Auguste, I think deserves a lot of credit too, even though he's not part of this team. He was such an important part of the program in the fallow years, sticking it out.
Yes.
But those two guys in particular, Miller, Wong seems like a little quieter guy. Miller, maybe a little bit more of like a kind of Joby. Like he's in some ways, like he's always got the smile, right? I think
and he loves to talk. He's
the ultimate glue guy.
Yeah.
Just those two guys, what they've meant to this run. And I especially want to talk about Miller because of his performance in the Elite Eight. What has made those two guys, there have been a lot of really good players who've come through Miami basketball. What do you think it is about those two that have been able to anchor this 2-year run?
Yeah, I think first of all, they're so loyal, Isaiah stuck around when things were
he
really
also
bad.
stuck out Miller came in obviously as a transfer.
Yeah, Miller came in later, but Isaiah came when things were, Isaiah stayed when things were really bad, and Chris Likes left and this one left, and people were bailing, and he is so loyal and such a hardworking guy, and just he was determined. He loved Miami, and he still does, and he may even come back again. Don't be surprised. He has one more year.
Yeah,
he has one more year. He loves this place. He works harder than. I was just at the send off the other day on Wednesday, and the whole team, they had a little practice. They all went off the court. They're starting to get ready for their send off party, and Isaiah was still in the gym for about half an hour. He was the last one out. He was staying in there practicing his shot over and over and over from every spot. He's just really, really hardworking and dedicated, and he has no ego whatsoever. That's why when that whole NIL thing came out, Oh, I want more money. That was not him. Maybe it was someone speaking for him. That was
Right.
not him. He's really modest and humble and a real team player. And Jordan Miller too. I mean, I think the main thing with this team is the way they share. They do not care who scores. They don't care who's
Yeah.
the leading scorer. They just want to win, and they pass that ball around 3-4 times a lot of times before someone has the best shot. So, I think Jordan Miller is extremely smart. We knew that right away. Right when he came from George Mason, his interviews were great. And we just knew right away, like, this guy has a certain charisma. He's a really good speaker. He's very smart. He understands the game. And, he's become a huge, huge part of the team. He already was playing a big role last year with the putbacks. The big thing he was known for was those little putbacks that he was
Yeah.
doing.
Because
Like
he
a
still
chance
is playing power forward basically as a guy who, when he gets a shot in the NBA, he'll be like a shooting guard or a small forward probably.
Right, right. But yeah, I mean, it's a really been a good combination. They get along great. They complement each other. They're very versatile. And it's been amazing to watch. And Isaiah coming back, I mean, that was a really big
Right.
deal
That was
because
where
when
it
he
started.
left, that was huge. It all started when he announced that he's coming back. Everybody was like, oh, okay, Isaiah Wong's coming back. And then it energized everybody. Like, maybe we can carry on what we did last year. And, Wooga Poplar has gotten much better. And Bensley Joseph is playing a big role. Harlan Beverly's getting in there more. So a lot of the guys, Miami is one of only 9 teams in the country that had no transfers last year. Nobody transferred from the team. One of only 9 schools out of 300. So there's a lot of stability there. Even though they lost 3 players, everybody else who was on the team stayed, and then they added Norchad and Nigel, and it's amazing. I didn't
Yeah.
expect them to make the Final Four, but when they started playing, it was pretty clear that they were pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all year long from day one, I think both of us had high hopes for this team. To me, the story of this run has, there have been kind of 2 things. And one is, and Jordan Miller, I think, sums this up, is the way that kind of the role players, and Jordan Miller's better than a role player, but the guys who, not the non-Isaiah Wong players, their improvement throughout this tournament alone, obviously throughout the season, but even in this tournament where Jordan Miller is the best player on the floor in an Elite Eight game, where Wooga Poplar has kind of become a star, who's, what Dan Hurley's talking about him as an NBA prospect. Like at this point, Anthony and I talked last night, and obviously we talked some Miami basketball, and like, could Wooga Poplar go to the draft this year? It's like not crazy when you look at the draft that really falls off after the top 5 or 6. Like he's the off the back pass, like he's got the whole package. And Miami, which gets so much attention as this transfer program, right? This team that, and not just in the NIL era, it's always been Jim Larranaga's MO is you get polished players. This team Jim Larranaga still develops guys really, really well. I mean, there was a stat going around, and there's a lot of reasons for this, that this is the first Final Four ever without a McDonald's All-American in it.
Right.
And you look at Miami across the board, and they recruit well, but like Isaiah Wong was like outside the top 50 as a recruit. He has been developed. He was good as a freshman, but he's gotten obviously better and better every year. He's an old school college basketball success story. The NIL stuff can cloud that a little bit, but he is an old school college basketball success story. Wooga Poplar, another guy who was, not a top 50 recruit.
Right.
I remember a couple of games I covered for you. I think it was last year around winter break. And every time I would cover a game, he would everyone would be cleared out and he'd be in the gym still shooting by himself.
Oh, he loves shooting.
Every year.
Wooga loves shooting. Yes.
Yeah. Like
he was always the
hour
last
plus
guy.
after a game.
After a game, he was always shooting. Yes.
He's an old school development story. And then even a guy like Jordan Miller, who came in last year, comes from George Mason. He was a good player at George Mason. Last year he was a role player. Like he was very much a role player last year.
Yeah.
He was the 5th best starter. Him and Wardenberg were the 4th, 5th best starters. And now he's like a star, a legitimate star. Even his 2-year run here, he has developed a lot. And that's what I think is so great about this Miami team, is that they have both, won in not just the NIL era, but the transfer era that Jim Larranaga always won in. But the foundation is still multi-year guys for the most part. Like Nigel Pack is really good, but the foundation of this team is, as I mentioned, Wong and Miller. And, Pack obviously kind of won them the Houston game in a lot of ways with his, what do you have, 7 3-pointers. But, it's also Luka Poplar. It's, like you said, Bensley Joseph, those bench guys have gotten better and better. They have that old school college basketball style in the same way, it's similar to a school like FAU, I would say. Honestly, everyone in this Final Four kind of has that where none of these guys are one and dones. Obviously, it's the no McDonald's All-American thing. But also it's not like the one transfer who came in and totally elevated the team. Miami used transfers to augment what was already a pretty good core.
Right, which he's always done. Shane Larkin was a transfer. Kenny Kaji was a transfer. Trey McKinney-Jones was a transfer. Angel Rodriguez, Sheldon McClellan, Charlie Moore. I mean, Jim Larranaga has a long list of transfers. He really likes adding transfers to a group. He likes having a couple older players. And that's been his MO all along, way before NIL. Today I wrote about the national media.
That's where I wanted to go next. But keep going.
Yeah, the national media these guys are here for the Final Four. And, the first question to every person pretty much was about the NIL deals and did it affect their locker room? And what's the relationship between Isaiah and Nigel? Was it fractured by the NIL deals? And the answer is no. I mean, it really wasn't. These guys have gotten along the whole time. And this team was, they made the Elite Eight last year. They made Sweet 16s, before there was NIL. They've always had transfers, but NIL, as I said to somebody, Coach L is the reason that they're here, not NIL. Coach L. Yeah.
Right. And he was doing, the NIL, first of all, the NIL thing is so goofy to me where Miami has become the poster child of this when
all the schools have NIL deals.
I know everyone does. It's crazy. Maybe
everyone
Miami
does. Armando Bacot has everybody has NIL deals. I'm sure these UConn guys have NIL deals. They even said that one of the walk-ons on the UConn team has an NIL deal. So everyone has NIL deals. It's only because John Ruiz announced $800,000 over 2 years. And when that number got out, the entire country jumped on it.
Yeah. But and meanwhile, right around the same time, I'm blanking on his name, from Kentucky, their big man, he threw like a $2.5 million NIL deal.
Right. Huge
Oscar
deals.
Sheboy.
Yeah, Oscar. Yeah.
It's so funny how Miami has become the poster child of this. Especially because their best player is, I guess it's because Isaiah Wong was wrapped up in it, but it's not like he was a transfer. Their best player was a guy who came to Miami as a freshman and has been here ever since.
By the way, his final 2 schools were Miami and UConn.
I know. I saw him talking about that today.
I'm going to write that. I'm going to write some of that tomorrow. But he went and visited UConn, and that was his second place. And Dan Hurley talked about it. He said Isaiah Wong was a heartbreaking distant second. And he said, I think you get a sense during the visit, whether you're going to get the gold or the silver. I think we always felt we were a little behind, and then he talked about how much they wanted him. They really, really did want him. And he really, really likes Isaiah Wong. And Isaiah considered, his family's from New Jersey. Right. And he considered, UConn and Miami were his 2 finalists.
Yeah. So the other thing I want to talk about with this Miami team is it's the reason that I thought they could not win a national championship. It's the defense, and they're still, across the season, their defense is mediocre. Even in the tournament, they're giving up 75 plus like every game basically. But as we talked about last week, they won the Drake game with their defense, and they kind of did it again against Texas. Marcus Carr got dinged up and seemed like that played maybe a role in Texas slowing down at the end there too. But again, Miami locked down on defense down the stretch. Texas, which was torrential in the first half. Again, it would be unprecedented for Miami to win this championship with the way their defense has been all year long, but I think their defense is good enough right now. Certainly they're considering the way their offense is playing. But what have you seen from the defense? You've been there, you've talked to them. They've been able to win games with it, which is not, you probably count on one hand the number of times they did that in the regular season. And maybe it's even 0. I can't remember a single time when I felt like they won a game by stringing.
They clamped down. Well, yeah, that Texas game was, though. They really did.
They did. So what have you seen? What has been different where they've seemed to figure something out there? Certainly.
I don't know. I mean, they've always, they have very active hands. They like to disrupt the passing lanes.
Mhm.
I mean, they've always been like that. They like to get steals. And I think, I mean, I also think they just tire guys out too. I think
Yeah.
the pace of the game, by the end of the game, I think that I think the other team gets a little tired and they can capitalize on that defensively. I don't know. He went to the press briefly in the end, I guess it was in the Indiana game, right?
Yeah.
Where they went to the press. Yeah. But they don't do that very often either. I don't know. I mean, the rebounds, Norchad Omier is obviously a premier rebounder. So there's that.
Mhm.
But I don't know that they're doing anything very much different than they've
Yeah.
done all
I
season.
I think the fitness or whatever you want to call it, like the way they wear teams
Stamina.
down, they really seem to have like they've obviously been a fast-paced team all year, but I mean you could really feel it, especially in that Houston game that like Houston had the number one defense in the country
Yeah.
and Miami poured it in against them and they just ran. Like
Yeah.
you could tell the game plan was like just don't let that defense get set.
Right.
Anytime a ball was deflected, even if it wasn't a steal, guys were going the other way. Sometimes it's a gamble, but they create a lot of points in transition off of that.
Oh, yeah.
And it feels like, and really the Drake game, Drake kind of bogged it down, and that was, I think, the struggle
Drake was
there.
the best. I mean, Drake had the best game plan against
Yeah.
them.
Miami in every other game, and again, Miami won it by going to the press, and then you said that as you mentioned, they did again against Indiana. When they can control the pace like that, and they're
They're
really
hard
tough
to
to
keep
beat, I
up with.
think. And they've
They're hard to keep up with.
in this tournament, that has been, I think, and again, I think the Houston game is where you felt it most because it was clearly the game plan. It was like every time someone gets a hand on a ball, we're going. And again, like Houston just couldn't stop them in that game, not because Miami was shredding their half court defense, but because they were getting run out layups and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, they know their identity so well. That's what I think Jim Larranaga, I know people like will quibble with his offense being like really simple, right? And like they don't run anything. It's all ISO. But the one thing that I think, you know, obviously one thing is college kids like that. But the
They
other thing
love
is just
that.
they know
He
their identity
empowers
so
them. He
well.
lets them run
They
he
but they know
empowers
their
them.
identity so well where and it's a fun identity to play. So maybe it's like, how hard is that? But they know that their identity is like, we're kind of crappy on defense. Let's just run, 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 run. And we can pretty much beat anyone because we are faster. We play four guards all the time, play like
Right.
basically five guards sometimes if Norchad gets in trouble.
Right.
And they're really tough to keep up with. It's different. It's, no, you look at the way teams play on the other side of the bracket where San Diego State is all defense, it's all plotting. FAU obviously is a 7-footer in the middle of everything. UConn is a 7-footer in the middle of
Yeah.
everything. Miami
Yeah, I
is
think
very different from everyone.
Miami's hard to guard. They're
Yeah,
hard to guard, and most teams have never played anybody like them. They have to get used to them, and UConn's going to have an adjustment too. I mean, they all said the right things, all the UConn players,
yeah,
that this is the best team that they're going to play all season, and it's they're good. They're really good. They're very athletic, and they're just so fast, and they put a lot of pressure on you. So I don't know. I think it's anybody's game. I really do. I
yeah.
know
I think both
picking
games.
UConn.
I think both games are pretty close to toss-ups. Miami UConn is very interesting because of both games actually contrast of styles where UConn's best player is a 7-foot two-way center who blocks feels like 5 shots a game. And Miami's center is 6'7",
6'7".
and they play 4 guards and they're gonna run all over you. But UConn's obviously got some really good guards and wings too. I don't want to make predictions necessarily and analyze the matchup too much, but because it's hard to, these tournament games are so strange. But
Oh
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it feels like a total toss up in both of these games.
If they've already beaten the number 1 seed and the number 2 seed, Miami had a tough. They beat a number 1
Yeah,
seed.
they beat the highest seed
Everyone
possible,
said,
pretty
the
much.
best
Yeah.
defense in the country. They were allowing 54 points a game or something, and Miami scored what, 85, 89, whatever it was.
Yeah, they've beaten all different styles of teams too.
Yeah. Yeah. So they've beaten a 1, they beat a 4, they beat a 2, different styles, big. People thought they were, oh, maybe they'll get past Drake, but they won't be able to beat Indiana. And then they beat Indiana. And
Yeah.
then, well, Houston now with their defense, they're not gonna be able to, they'll shut them down. And they didn't. And then Texas was a team that was more similar to Miami in ways, and they found a way to win that one too. So I don't know. Anyone who thinks that they know really doesn't know. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, I mean, I was skeptical of them having a chance to go all the way just because of the defense. I mean, their offense has been electric, one of the best in the country. Their defense is mediocre, ultimately. I was worried about the Indiana game because of the size, right? And, in my bracket, I had Indiana winning that game because I just was worried about how Miami was going to guard Trace Jackson Davis.
right.
They had a great game plan for him, just threw bodies at him and tried to make everyone else beat them. And Indiana, their lack of depth next to him and Jaden Hood-Schifino was exposed. I was, the Texas game, I was worried just because Texas kind of felt like a maybe slightly better version of Miami, right? A lot of good guards, but better defensively than Miami. Miami won a shootout with them. Houston, again, as we said, great defense. They picked them apart by changing up the tempo there. And obviously Drake it's like kind of funny how close they were to losing in the first round. You could say the same thing for FAU, probably should have lost in the first round if Memphis had gotten that timeout that they seemed to call. It's funny the way these margins work in the tournament. I remember when UConn, when they were a 7 seed and won it all, they went to overtime in their first round game and then kind of mowed through the rest of the tournament. It's funny how it works, but right now Miami is obviously as hot as anyone other than UConn, I guess, who has destroyed teams. So,
oh yeah, they're beating people in this tournament by 22.5 points.
It'll be interesting because, as we've said a lot, Miami never got blown out once all year. So I'd be shocked if it's not a close game. And I don't know if you want to make a prediction, but I feel, again, it feels very toss-up-y to me, but hard to pick against Miami right now. And
it is hard to pick, but everyone picked it. They have that little saying now, don't pick us. That's their little motto now, don't pick us. And no one has picked them since the Drake game. Even the Drake game, some people were saying because they thought Norchad wasn't going to be 100% or wasn't going to play.
Right.
But people were picking that, became a popular upset pick. And they've been the underdog in every single round, except the Drake game, and they've won every single game. So nothing would surprise me. I would just say nothing will surprise me. They're going to have a bigger crowd for Miami than they've had, for any other road games. I mean, I'm hearing, between 5,000-8,000 people are going to have already bought tickets and are flying there. So, it could end up being as many as 10,000 Miami fans, which would be unbelievable. Now, the place seats 72,000.
I know.
So 10,000 is not going to look that bad, or not that good, or 5,000, but still for Miami, they're going to make some noise. Miami fans are loud. There aren't that many of them, but they are.
And it's not, UConn's got a huge fan base, but
huge.
But I don't think, but I think everyone else there, like I would guess the FAU people are going to be rooting for Miami, and the Miami people are going to be rooting for FAU.
I think both of those teams will root for each other to beat each other in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and honestly, the Final Four games, the crowd kind of is never a huge factor again, because those buildings are so big and cavernous.
Yeah.
It's a very unique environment. But yeah, I think, again, I'm not picking against Miami anymore. I've picked against them a couple of times in this tournament. In my own mind, we don't publish predictions or anything, but hard to pick against them at this point. You were at press conferences today. Just quickly before I want to close out with the women, but first, just I don't know, what were like the couple biggest topics of all the team's press conferences today? What stood out to you most?
Topics, to be honest, for one of the big topics was the NIL. You know, the national media. They loved asking about the NIL deals, so that was a big thing. A lot of history with Coach L. People love to ask him about history.
Yeah, this is like his coronation. Like we've talked about, like his Hall of Fame credentials. Like he's in now. I think he's locked it up. This has been his coronation run.
Yeah, so a lot of talk about his George Mason run in relation even to not only to their run, but in relation to FAU.
It's so similar.
Yeah. So, in FAU, he talked about how that run, they were an 11 seed. No one thought they were going to do anything. They thought they were going to get crushed in the first round. So he talked about George Mason quite a bit. He talked about just how happy he is and how he has no desire to retire whatsoever. He said, I am having the time of my life. I'm on top of the world. I'm going nowhere. He said, what could be more fun than hanging out with young people and doing what you love? And, he was in such a good mood, such a good mood. And, Dan Hurley talked about how last year he thought that lack of depth is what caught up to them, that they weren't quite deep enough. He thought they were good, but not quite deep enough. And this year they do have the depth, and their big guys get a rest a little bit, whereas last year they didn't. So, he talked a little bit about that. And then for the Miami and the FAU especially, there was a lot of talk about having two South Florida teams in the Final Four. And what does it mean? What does it mean for South Florida basketball? What does it mean for the areas? It can increase recruiting. I do think definitely having two teams in the Final Four would make some recruits look twice and say, hey, two teams from this region made the Final Four. So if you're a kid from Florida and you're being recruited by FAU and Miami, I think you're going to maybe take a look, maybe more than you did before. Because, Miami, this whole area, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, they've always just been considered fertile football ground, but never really basketball tradition. Very few here and there. Tim James, James Jones. There have been a couple of Miami guys that have Miami roots, but to be honest, this current Miami team doesn't have Miami players on it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, there's one pretty good recruit, or actually a couple pretty good recruits playing at Columbus, not too far away from Miami. So you have to think this is you have to think Cameron Boozer, the number one player in the class of 2025.
Oh yes, we know the name.
To this. So FAU, I saw there were today, Dusty May kind of locked up an extension there. What is the vibe around FAU? Because obviously this run is simultaneously, as I wrote the other day, out of nowhere, but also like not surprising. This team was ranked all year, or not all year, but quite a few times throughout the season.
Miami only beat them by 2.
USA.
Miami beat last year. If they do end up playing each other, they played each other in November of 21 in Boca. The place was sold out. Their fans were going crazy. And Miami needed a buzzer beater to beat them. They beat them by 2, like 68-66. And FAU was really good, really good in that game. And I remember this year when FAU made their run, and I asked Coach L about FAU's run, and he said, let me just say, I'm really glad we didn't schedule them this year.
I mean, they ran through Conference USA, which also has 2 teams in the NIT finals.
Right.
Beat Florida at Florida. I know
they beat Florida. That was the first thing. When they beat Florida, it was
the third game of the season. Everyone
it was really early, and everyone was like, oh, FAU just beat Florida.
And I think they have 10 winning seasons in their program history, and 5 have been the 5 with Dusty May. So, when a team goes on a run like this, it can go one of 2 ways, right? Like at George Mason, they never, they got to the tournament a couple more times. Then Larranaga leaves. I think they're about to be on their 5th coach or 4th coach since he left. Or you can go the Wichita State way, where you do that, and I think the next season they went undefeated in the regular season and were a 1 seed. What's your sense? Again, you don't cover the team, but you're up there. You paid attention a little bit. Can they turn this into something more sustainable? Like, they seems like they're going to try to commit to.
Well,
Dusty
the fact
May.
that he's staying, I think the fact that he's staying is
they're
huge.
definitely going to get one more year out of him.
If he were leaving, then you're starting over, and guys may leave and whatever. But if they, making the Final Four, no matter what happens on Saturday, I mean, for that program to make the Final Four and keep the coach, I mean, that is huge. They can build on that. I mean, if they can build on that, they really, I mean, they're an interesting team, and people do love South Florida. I mean, if you're a kid and you're being recruited by
I love their court with the palm trees. It's great.
Yeah, if you're being recruited by some school in, Illinois or Michigan or Wisconsin or whatever, and then you come down to FAU, to Boca Raton, and you see the palm trees and you're near the beach and all that. I mean, that's a pretty cool place.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, their closest analog is Wichita. If you look at what Wichita did the year that they came out, I think they were a 9 seed and went to the Final Four. They finished that year number 17 in Ken Palm. That's what FAU is. Obviously, they rolled through a league that was probably a little underrated, just like FAU did, and put up a ton of wins. If they win the championship, that's 37 wins. It'll only be the second.
That's what Jim
37
Larranaga
win champion ever.
Jim said today. Jim said today, you don't win 30 games in Division I. You don't win 30 games unless you're really good.
Yeah, 37. There's only been one other team to win 37 games in a national championship ever. And I think it was the 38-0 Kentucky, like the Rick Pitino Kentucky team. So yeah, it's been a really, really long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think good things are ahead, especially with him staying. That's really big.
Okay, let's close out real quick with some women's basketball talk. I was kind of worried about them in the Elite Eight against LSU.
Yeah.
The team is really good. I kind of don't understand how they were a 2 seed but they have 2 losses all year, and they're both South Carolina. But that's neither here nor there. Awesome run for them. We talked a little bit about it last week, just what this can do for the program. It's definitely the stamp. It's the biggest validation the program's ever had. As we said, filled the one kind of big void on Katie Meyer's resume. Where do they go from here? What's next for this program?
Well, they have almost their whole team back.
Yeah.
I mean, they could if the twins both, if the twins decide to come back, they're losing Destiny Harden, but they have a really good team coming back.
Yeah.
They have a lot of players who have an extra season with the COVID thing.
Mm-hmm.
All these athletes get a second and another extra season. I think again, Katie, I would think it's going to really help recruiting. The fact, how far they went, what they did with Indiana on their home court,
yeah,
what they did with Villanova, they got national TV exposure and won really exciting games at the end and showed, their fortitude and how gritty they are. And Katie Meyer showed her personality a lot. I mean, I heard some sports writers who don't really follow women's basketball who were following the men's tournament, but they were watching the women's game. And they were, asking me questions about Katie Meyer because they really liked her personality in the press conferences and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the amount of exposure that program got, getting that Elite Eight run, that can pay really big dividends going forward, with recruiting and just with overall exposure, maybe with attendance. I think it's really big. I think it's, even though that loss was brutal and, Destiny had a rough game and everything, but she was a killer in so many games this year. And the reason they were there was largely because of her. So I know she felt terrible, but she had a great season and she's been a warrior. And that team was just a plucky, gritty team,
Yeah.
So
and I think the thing I like about that team is, well, one, as you mentioned, they could bring a lot of the team roster back, and that would obviously be an analog a little bit to what the men's team has just done, going to the Elite Eight and the Final Four next year. But the fact that it was an underdog run and kind of came out of nowhere, but also they stacked wins against good teams all year long.
Yeah.
So it's obviously in women's basketball really, really hard to crack that. There's still a gap between the South Carolina, Virginia Tech this year, though, is the team that Miami beat, right? So there's still a gap between, I think, South Carolina, LSU, Iowa this year, especially
Iowa,
Caitlin Clark back, who could come back. Maryland, Stanford. There's still that upper echelon that's hard to crack, but Miami has beaten teams in that tier.
Yeah.
Not just this year. It's always kind of been Katie Meyer's thing, right? Remember they beat Notre Dame a couple of years ago.
Right.
When
Yeah.
Notre
They have
Dame
big
was number
wins.
1 or number 2 in the country.
Some big wins. Yeah.
But they have never stacked it together like this. That's the encouraging thing to me, is that that they're capable of this. Not just because we saw it just for a flash in the pan here, but we've seen it over and over again for the last couple of years. And now they strung it together in a way that they had never had before.
Right. Yeah. So it's going to be fun next year. I'll be curious to see. I hope that the fans will still keep coming out. I mean,
I just tweeted about this. I'm very interested because we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, I think after the regular season wrapped up, just how good that crowd was and how the students really, really bought in.
Right.
And the student section was packed every night. I mean, obviously if Miami wins it all, that it's going to be sold out all year long next year, pretty much, except maybe winter break.
So.
Winter break's always hard to pack.
The send-off was really exciting. I mean, I had been when they made the Sweet 16, back in 2013 and stuff. I went to those same send-offs with the little bus in front of the Watsco Center. I'm not kidding. There were maybe 20 people.
Oh, I mean, even last year, I was at one of them last year, and there was
nobody.
Yeah,
it was just like some staff standing there with some pom-poms.
Yeah, 20 people.
This is completely different. This was
Yeah.
This was a friend. This looked like a legitimate, bona fide ACC basketball
Yeah.
team going to the Final Four. You know, it
Which is
was,
what they are. And it's
which
cool to
is
see
what
it
they
show up.
are.
Yeah.
It took a long time, but that is what they really are right now. That
Yeah.
Duke is not there, Carolina's not there, Virginia's not there. University of Miami is in Houston.
Yeah.
I can attest to it. I saw them with my own eyes, and it's happening. They're playing in the Final
Yeah.
Four on Saturday
Yeah.
night. We'll
I
see
mean,
what happens.
and honestly, the path is open because you mentioned like Duke and North Carolina not there. Well, Coach K's not there anymore. Roy Williams
Right.
isn't there anymore. It's Jim Larranaga and Tony Bennett. Like
Yeah.
that's it. Those are the only two like great coaches I think left in the ACC. Jim Boeheim's not there. I don't think he's been great the last couple of years, but obviously
Right.
has that same kind of resume. The ACC is open for Miami to kind of run it. I think them in Virginia. I mean, Duke obviously is just going to have talent every year.
Right.
But yeah, I'll be really interested if Miami loses Saturday, what the fan support, the community fan support is going to look like next year. Because I know it's hard to get to Coral Gables, but it's also a metro rail. Like it should be good next year. I think I'm
It's
already
not that
excited for
hard.
next
There's
season.
plenty of people who live in Coral Gables and Pinecrest and South in the Dadeland area, and you know,
Yeah,
there are enough people there to fill that
yeah, a
stadium.
lot easier to get there than whatever we're calling the pizza arena these days
Right.
for most people. So,
Right.
all right, I've kept you on for too long. You got to go get dinner. It is
I
late.
do.
Thanks for doing this, Michelle. Enjoy your
Sure.
weekend there. I'm pretty jealous that you're going to be there for the Final Four. It should be a lot of fun. You can follow Michelle on Twitter at Kauf Sports. Be sure to follow all of her coverage from Houston. There's a lot of it, obviously. You follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. I've been stepping in for Michelle at the Miami Open this week, which is usually
Yes, you've been
her
doing great
baby.
stuff. Really good
I'm a
stuff at the
sneaky
Miami Open.
tennis guy, so I've been excited. I like watching tennis. I'd never been to the Miami Open, so
Oh, it's
it's been a nice
amazing.
excuse.
I
Yeah,
love that.
really cool
One of the
event.
bad things of this run has been missing. I
Missing
mean,
the
I've been
Open.
covering that event for like 30 years.
I
So
know.
I love that tennis event, and I have missed it. I
Well,
really
you've
have.
had a good reason. I think you've come out on the strong end of the
Are you
of the
covering,
trade off
who's
here.
covering the men's final?
Susan, I'm doing the women's final. She's doing the
Okay.
men's.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, let's close out there. Thanks as always for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.